Welcome back to another live podcast. I'm your host, Emily Bose, and really excited to be here with my friend, Aaron Kraljev. Aaron, thanks so much for being on the show with me.
Thank you for having me, Emily.
Of course. So you have a really interesting, diverse career background. I know you've done a lot of different things within talent acquisition and been able to influence over 1 million hires, which is really exciting. We were talking a little bit before the show about how sometimes when you're trying to bring enough talent into the funnel to meet the needs of some of these larger organizations, you really need to widen the talent pools that you're drawing from and, start to look at some of that non-traditional talent and maybe even look at talent that may not check every box, but could be trainable or that type of situation. So when you're sitting at that place of making those decisions, how do you make those adjustments in a way that ensures that you're going to get the talent that you need in the organization, but still open things wide enough to access those other talent pools?
Yeah, it's a great question. You look at like 1 million hires, and I did that math a long time ago. It either means you've been doing this a really long time, which I have, or you've worked with some large companies that hires at like this massive scale. I think at some point when the numbers, you start adding zeros on the end, you get to a place where your need far exceeds the available talent pool. And that's a really hard discussion to have with like your senior leadership, maybe line of business leaders or what have you, and a really hard discussion to have with hiring managers because they've got a box that they want their candidates to fit in. And I'm sorry, but they've got bias. Like in the past, we are, people that have been successful in this role look like this, sound like this, come from this sort of background. At some point, you really do need to make this pivot where, and this is the phrase I use in our pre-call, I'll use it again, where you kind of make the talent you want to have because it's not there off the shelf. And it's a change management issue for sure. It's not the kind of thing where you can flip a switch and everybody's going to be on board. But whether be it through rotational programs or cross-functional learning opportunities, or even pre-applicant training, really putting your applicants, maybe from non-traditional backgrounds, into a position to be as successful as possible. And then once you get them in, put them in a place to succeed, and just show the power of what that workforce can do for you, instead of having roles open for months and years on end.
That absolutely makes sense. Can you think of any examples where you've seen that work really well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you two. One is, and you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the veteran workforce, right?
Yes.
So how do you transition servicemen and women who are coming out of active service into what we consider like private sector? And when I worked at Wells Fargo is a great partner to veterans. Very willing to do this. There wasn't like a lot of change management that needed to take place. The wealth was there, the need was there. They understood what the benefit was to them. So we create cross-functional opportunities where you can come in and be like, do you want to work in finance? Do you want to work in accounting? Do you want to work in risk, audit? I think one of the things I see in the veteran space so often is they go, well, here's 5 things veterans can do. And that's just not the case. There's like, they can do anything.
Yes.
And so what can we do to help the organization understand that these are, incredibly diverse candidates, and then also help the candidates find where their passion lies. Maybe they come out and like, yeah, I think I see myself with a future in security, where really it could be in something completely different, and helping them find their passion. I think the second time I've seen that done, also in finance, where we were hiring at such a scale that we were basically presenting an opportunity of transitioning servicemen and women and saying, hey, maybe you are thinking about risk or security or audit. How would you think about finance? How would you think about working in the investment space? And helping people kind of lead them down that path and really teaching them that business from the ground up. Both a little different, kind of different flavors of the same ice cream, if you will, but both very, very successful. And those are programs that are, still carrying on today long after I left the organization.
Those are great examples. We've touched on this in several of the conversations recently on the podcast, and I think it is true across multiple different sectors and industries. We've talked about it from more of the skilled labor perspective, but I think to your point, it also exists on maybe more of the traditional white collar side too. This idea that not everyone knows what all the opportunities are out there. And there are pools of talent out there that may love and be passionate about and be fantastic in the type of roles that you're offering or, looking to fill, but they don't even, number one, they don't know that that type of job even exists. And number two, they don't realize that they would be good at it. I talked to Albert Bellamy a couple weeks ago, who's really into data and helping people transition into the data science space. And he was saying he has a ton of teachers transitioning into be data scientists, not necessarily what you would think of off the bat, but a lot of them are really great at it, and they have to do a lot with data as teachers. So they have, good experience with that. There's other examples you can think of as well, but that's kind of interesting what you were saying, that you're presenting them with an opportunity and helping them think about options they might not have otherwise considered. Because I think, especially if you have a really well-known brand, it might be easy when you're on the inside to assume everyone on the outside knows what the opportunities are here. With reality, like before I did any recruiting in manufacturing back in the day, I thought jobs in manufacturing were like an assembly line. And in reality, there's 100 different things, maybe more, that you can do in a manufacturing facility that don't ever touch that. That use all kinds of different skill sets. And so how do you, as an employer, especially if you're a really well-known, a name brand, like obviously you work for Wells Fargo or other big companies like that, and people might think, oh, Wells Fargo, if I want to work there, I have to be a bank teller, that like that's the opportunity there. From what you're saying, there's a lot more opportunity than that in some of these companies. So as an employer, especially if you're looking at some of these non-traditional talent pools, how do you, from the, employer branding or recruitment marketing aspect, what have you seen be really effective to help people recognize that these opportunities exist and see themselves in those opportunities in a way that compels them to pursue them?
Yeah. Years ago, I'm dating myself. This very issue of what you're talking about is you get pigeonholed into something, right? If you work for Nike, well, you just sell shoes, or you work for a bank, you must be a bank teller. I worked at Wells Fargo for 23 years. I talked to my own family. Oh, what branch do you work at? I'm like, oh gosh, and I did work in branch. I worked in the supermarket in a bank, So I mean, there's definitely some truth to that. But I mean, at their height, there were 425, 430,000 employees.
Wow.
Yeah, some people worked in a branch, but how do you do that? We actually went as far, and I can't believe I got this approved to this day, where we had an employer brand campaign that said Wells Fargo, not just a bank. And that violates every single rule of employer brand. You can't have not in there. You can't say you're not the thing that people think you are. But the whole notion of that is, and I think large employers, especially, Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 100 companies that are known for a thing, really struggle with that. And so kind of pulling at that thread a bit, if you're able to help folks understand that because of your size, really lean into how big you are, you can have an entire career here and do 4 or 5 completely different things. I did at Wells Fargo. I started out in the supermarket branch. I worked in marketing for 10 years. I worked in recruiting, enjoyed all those things in addition to dozens of different little stretch assignments along the way. Helping people understand that and say, look, you don't have to move desks. You don't have to change your employer. You can keep your tenure and you can do all these different things. I also think when you're looking at like non-traditional employees, helping folks understand the breadth and depth of what you have to offer. Large organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of different roles, different departments, different things. And I think as time has gone on, employers have gotten more flexible in looking at non-traditional employees. I think non-traditional employees maybe have not gotten as creative about where their talents could actually play.
And I think, I think it's hard to know sometimes where especially when you are talking to folks coming out of the military, they get told such mixed messages. Like you were saying before, folks from the military can only do 5 things. Everyone gets told to be a software developer. Now everyone's being told to go into cybersecurity or now it's probably AI, or on the other side, it's like everybody should get their PMP and be a project manager, and, military folks can only do operations and logistics. Like, it's very easy to get pigeonholed. And so I think it's interesting to think about how, how companies maybe even thinking in terms of how they write their job descriptions, or some of the keywords they include about the personality type that thrives in that type of role, or what the work environment is like, or some of those things that, maybe haven't always been traditionally included, but can help non-traditional folks visualize themselves in that type of opportunity. Have you guys tried anything like that, where you've kind of tweaked the way you talk about the role or the job description or some of those things to help other people find themselves in it?
Yeah, prior, when I was very close to this work, we actually changed our job descriptions for everybody to be more open to transitioning servicemen and women. And that's a massive thing, right? Like, you're going to change them all to do this thing. I know a lot of companies will do, they'll do different versions of their JDs to speak to different folks. I think that gets super confusing because you can't target. Like, what if you're the thing that you are, but they would think you're something else? That's really hard. 10 years ago, it was all the rage to have a military skills translator, right? Which, in time,
pros and cons,
we were trying our best, right? But it's created exactly the thing that you and I are talking about, is like, you put in your background and we give you the 10 roles we think you can do. There's no space for kind of feeling out other areas that may be adjacent to your background. Here's our $1 billion idea. I think at some point this plays itself out: skilled workforce, non-skilled workforce, what have you. But what part does value alignment and a person's ability to really embrace the brand and the size and the mission of the company, is that like a 50% thing? Is it a 40% thing? What if we started there and then let the jobs take care of themselves after the fact? I don't see anybody doing that, but I feel this is where things are going, because through COVID and whatever we're in now, I see a lot of folks who feel kind of divorced from the mission or the purpose of their employer.
Yes.
And they get detached, and then all of a sudden performance starts to fall off, and they're not giving the best to their employer. What if we started there and then let the skills take care of themselves?
That's a great point. And I've definitely seen this in, sort of this millennial generation. I know is very, or a lot of folks are very kind of mission oriented. And I think Gen Z, even though maybe it would appear not, I think they're actually probably even more so. I think it's that they're kind of feel maybe a little jaded, to, like you're saying, that it doesn't appear that there's a lot of purposeful work or mission-driven work. And that's not really being talked about enough. And I've also kind of noticed that shift, and it's been interesting to me. And I think personally that it may be a shift, and COVID did some of this as well, where it's like our grandparents worked at the same company for their whole careers, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe in the same job, or maybe worked their way up the ladder in the same type of job. And then they got their pension and, they went on their way. And those types of opportunities feel like they're not as available anymore. And I think in some ways it's good that I think COVID and all of the different things that happened with that, I think sort of loosened people's perception of folks moving between jobs a little bit more quickly, where maybe some people who were able to make some significant career jumps and like really accelerate their career by changing jobs a few times over the last few years have been able to take advantage of that in a good way. But at the same time, I feel like we've sort of lost that sense of stability where, hey, I could come to a company, really buy into what they're doing and like pursue a long career here. And you said something before that I think was really interesting that ties into this, where you were saying really large companies have the opportunity to say, hey, there's a lot of different things you could do here. You might, especially, in some of these really, really large companies, you may have companies within companies within companies. Like I have a friend who worked at United Healthcare, and was running a tech startup within a company within United Healthcare. So, there's also those types of opportunities. And so how can, especially bigger companies, though I think small to mid-size would benefit from this too, how can those companies, from your perspective, do a better job not only of sharing, their mission to help people buy into that, but also painting the picture of, hey, you could actually have a long-term career here if you wanted to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you stay in the same job, but it could mean that you have this path, this growth path in front of you. And here's some branches even that go off of that path. If you're like, starting in a branch and then going into marketing and then going into, talent acquisition, and then maybe you're going into training, or maybe you're going into something else, again, that visibility. People don't always realize what's available. And I think something big companies can have to offer specifically is the opportunity to maybe have a longer career path within the same organization, but not necessarily feel like you're stuck doing the same job by doing that. And so I guess the first question I have is, how can companies do a better job of bringing visibility to that sort of career path or career journey available in their organization, along with sharing the mission of why someone might want to stay with them long term? What do you think about that?
Yeah, log into LinkedIn and it's how to recruit better, how to attract talent better, how to do all these things. And it's, I've really come full circle on this. Like, if we had better internal mobility and we treated our folks better, we wouldn't have to recruit as hard. Like, it'd be so much 100%. Easier. All of a sudden, 100%. My million new hires is maybe 200,000, and the bar gets so much easier to clear when you're actually, you have value aligned employees, you take good care of your folks, they want to be here, and they want to be here so much that they see a long-term career with you. I think, I'm going to date myself, but those choose your own adventure books.
Yeah.
I think on one hand, an employer has a responsibility to help their employees, their team members understand exactly sky's the limit, whatever they can do. And to also create a structured environment where those things can be shared, and where like hiring managers aren't going to punish you because you want to work in a different department in 2 or 3 years, or maybe you're going to school in the evenings after you log off and you're really trying to improve yourself. I got my master's degree while I was working full time and raising an infant, so like I was really hustling because I had a decent idea of what I wanted to do. On the flip side, I think it's incumbent on the employee to really have those hopes and dreams and be very open about what they are, assuming there's a place where you can share those things. So it's this kind of push and pull between the two. I don't think it's all on one or all on the other. I think, as an employee, you own your development. You do. I've had good managers. I've had lousy managers, more good than lousy. I'm not sitting here for those good ones if they didn't encourage my development and just say, hey, sky's the limit. What do you want to do? I mean, I've had 4 or 5 different careers in my career so far, and God knows where it's going to end up, because I sure as heck wouldn't have penciled it out this way. Right. I think people need the freedom to dream big like that, and employers really need to help create a safe space where that can be done.
And that's a great point, where it can be talked about without employers feeling like, or the specific hiring manager feeling like, oh, you might only stick around for 2 to 3 years. Not sure that it's worth, bringing you in. It's interesting. Someone I talked to, Will Phillips, I spoke to last week, he was saying that he had worked for an organization that told him up front, we're small, there's no upward mobility here, but you're going to work here for 2 to 3 years, get exposure to a lot of things and a lot of like high level leaders at our clients' organizations. And then one of them is going to hire you into a role way beyond what we can do with you. So we're setting you up for success to go beyond us. And we know you're only going to probably be here for 2 to 4 years. And like, we're good with that, because he was really high performing talent. They got 2 to 4 years out of him. And then they, knew he was going to go on to bigger things, and they were going to, bring in the next person and probably continue to do that. But they were kind of pitching themselves as a stepping stone in his career path and trying to help him, excel up to the next level while still getting the benefit of having him in their organization. I thought that was a really interesting perspective. Maybe some good self-awareness on the part of the company.
It is. And we talk about development. Sometimes development is somewhere else. Every time I see like a company post an update about somebody in their organization that's leaving somewhere else and them wishing them well, that's like, that is so highly evolved versus what we would have seen maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And when you do that, you're setting up this loop where you've opened a door for that person to come back when there is an opportunity.
Right.
It's just goodbye for now. It's not goodbye forever. And I think how you treat that, and having an open mind about maybe somebody's development, they're going to get what they get from you for this time being. And if we're very open about that, that's a very healthy thing.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you think, I know you host a podcast called How We Interview. You've talked to lots of talent folks about interviewing. What do you think are some of the biggest takeaways you've had from those conversations, especially when it comes to this non-traditional talent space? Are there things that could be adjusted in the interview process that might allow more of those people to rise to the top, or anything that comes to mind, as something you've heard as a theme that would kind of apply to this idea?
Yeah. Quick background. So I was laid off in May of 2023, and my good friend David Heller, who owns ReMB, reached out and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Do you know anybody?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, I don't." He's like, "Well, I'm thinking you." And so 33 episodes later, I think one of the, and you probably found this as well, I feel like I'm taking more than I'm giving in these podcast episodes. I feel like I'm getting like my master's degree in talent acquisition in talking to all these amazing folks. And because they're topical, no 2 episodes are the same. Like we're talking about alumni, talk to the Starbucks alumni team, or you're talking about tech startups, or you're talking about, you and I spoke, and we talked a ton about the veteran space. I think some themes that have really resonated with me are things that I've learned. Like I've got these very strongly held beliefs in regards to interviewing. Some of those have been challenged as a part of this process. I think when we're looking at like non-traditional interviewing, there was this huge trend for like structured interviews. If anybody's been through a loop at Amazon, you're going to go through 10 to 12 interviews, and they're very, very structured, and it's kind of the same as it ever was. And they do a great job with prep, but I think we are starting to go back. The pendulum's kind of tipping back to actually having human conversations, which is really what it's really what it's all about. And so some things that I have seen throughout my interview, or through my podcast, is what can you do to foster human conversations? One of the questions that you kind of went away for a while is asking the candidate, what do you want? Like, not why are you here? Not, why did you apply for this role? But what do you want? What are your hopes and dreams? How do you think this opportunity is going to get you to that end? And really asking them to kind of bring those two things together. And if they're not able to verbalize that, I think both parties agree that's not a fit for them. I also think interview prep is fascinating. So I kind of poked fun at Amazon for that. But one of the things I took away from that, like, is it so bad to have very prepared candidates? In the AI age, there's a million different ways to cheat in an interview now, and it's getting harder and harder to assess actual functional talent or skill. What if you leaned in so heavily to interview prep that the urge to use AI or like a cheat code, it just disappears? Like, people can actually be fully prepared and give the best version of themselves. Somebody will say, well, what if it's all bogus? What if it's vaporware? What if these people aren't really who they say they are? You can get that anyway now with AI. It's entirely possible to fake this thing. What if you just leaned into creating resources to help candidates put their best foot forward, and then you can assess them for fit, be it skill, value fit, what have you.
Right. That's a really interesting point. I've seen more and more conversation around this. Why not send candidates your interview questions in advance? and let them be prepared with answers. And I think there's an idea of like wanting to see how people, think on their feet, or how they respond, or somehow there is this preconception in the recruiting space of, if we tell them what we're asking, then somehow they're going to tell us what we want to hear and not their real answer or something. But good interviewees will do that anyway. And people who maybe are just don't think it's fast on their feet are going to struggle, So even thinking in terms of not the non-traditional talent, just, everyone at the top of the funnel, I can think of multiple people in my life or even in my family that would do significantly better, be able to actually just show their real selves if they had a little bit of time to prepare and think about their answer, because they're just more thoughtful people.
Yeah.
I'm a great interviewee. I am really good at thinking on my feet. I actually had someone sort of insult me with that one time. She was like, I bet you could talk yourself into any job, even if you weren't qualified. And I was like, thank you.
Yeah. There's a word is called slick or something, which I've been called more than once. And I think,
but it's also my personality. I wasn't trying to fake anything. I was being genuine, but she just didn't expect me to be able to come back with answers as quickly, I guess. I don't know. But you're right. I mean, I guess my point is, not only could you make the road a little easier for some non-traditional talent folks, you could probably actually avail yourselves of more talent in general for people that are just, the like not good test takers in the room who just get a little bit of anxiety and do better when they prep,
Yeah. I have a dear friend who's an expert at what she does. She's probably one of the best I've ever seen. She's a nightmare in interviews. Like, we've done interview prep and she's stressed out by me, and I've known her for 30 years. Like, there are people like that exist, but you absolutely want that person on your team because nobody is better than them. So at some point we had gotten, and this is one of the things we talk a lot about on the podcast, is like, how much does the interview matter if the skills are there? Right. Because they're not going to be interviewing on the job. That's not part of the gig. They're just doing the job. Right. So as long as they're not a psychopath, right, and they just tend to get a little nervous, so they have a hard time thinking on their feet, which you're right, is definitely, thank God you and I can do it, because God knows what I'd be doing otherwise.
And it's a part of our job, right? Like, we're in the line of works that we're in because we're good at thinking on our feet.
Yeah, and it's not something that you're born with. I think it's a skill you develop. I remember being in college, going to speech classes and getting up there just being mortified. It turns out now I'm way more comfortable doing that than having a one-on-one conversation. So it's an evolution, right? And I think we need to create interview spaces where everybody can feel comfortable and then can put their best foot forward.
I absolutely agree. What do you think about, I've seen kind of a mixed bag for what LinkedIn feedback is worth around employers asking candidates to kind of do a lot of work before or within the interview process. And I think it really depends on the type of work that you're asking them for, or, what's involved. What have you seen that's worked really well? Because you mentioned maybe an interview isn't as important if you can assess the person's skills. But unless you're if you're assessing some sort of soft skill or more intellectual skill versus a hard skill, like, something on the job, like a skilled worker, or something like coding, or something that, it's a little easier to have kind of a black and white test for. What have you seen that's worked well and kind of struck the right balance of giving the employer what they need, but not necessarily feeling too burdensome to someone who might be out having to do 10 of these in a week,
Yeah, I think some roles, there has to be a functional assessment, coding, for example. Like, it's got to be done. For what you and I do, I have done work projects or work studies. If it's my team and my process, I'm paying folks for their time. These can take a lot of time.
Yeah.
I have, and I will not say who it was with. I have gone through an interview process, and I was not selected for the role, and they put my work study in production. And
I have heard that.
you sign your rights away when you do that. That's their intellectual property. And so I've got a very kind of stark opinion on that. If I'm starting something from scratch and I'm not hiring engineers or what have you, they're core jobs or shared services jobs, I think your interview process has to be good enough where you can have a very clear answer at the end of your candidate slate. Where this gets tricky is if the folks who are part of the review process aren't comfortable with the role that you're hiring. So they can't assess skill or fit because they don't know the role itself. That would be like my one caveat where, yeah, maybe an assessment, a light assessment or a light work project makes sense to educate and help get the interviewers to a point where they can have a level of comfort.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've definitely interviewed people for roles that were above my head in terms of their skill set. I learned how to speak a lot of lingo and throw out some acronyms for, job functions, especially in manufacturing, that I didn't really know anything about, but I learned enough about to kind of gauge if maybe that person knew less than I did.
Yeah.
Or more than I did. So, you can learn how to, to a degree, assess some of those things. But I think also, to your point on, the give and take of the talent side, the actual job seeker side versus the employer side, I do think that there's more and better information out there around preparing for interviews, but a lot of people truly just don't prepare, and then don't understand why they don't get jobs. But I've done plenty of interviews where I sent them pretty much all the questions, the types of answers I was looking for, websites, videos to prepare with, how we recommended, you structure your response to these questions, and they would show up and just have absolutely no idea. It got to the point where I would just ask a question at the beginning, like, I think it typically ended up just being like, hey, why do you specifically want to work at this company? Mm-hmm. Like, have you actually looked into them at all? And if they didn't have like a relatively thoughtful answer to that question, I wouldn't even finish the interview, because it wasn't worth it. Always those candidates ended up not being worth my time or theirs, because they weren't ready. They weren't a good fit, So it's that prep really does have to go both ways. Like, you can do all the work in the world to try to set them up for success. And, if the job seekers aren't putting in the effort to prepare themselves, then it gets a little bit tricky. I think my last question, because I know we need to wind down here, is just, you mentioned those internal cultures, taking care of our people, having that, mission driven focus, and letting that kind of be a guiding light. And hopefully that allowing there to be less turnover, less retention, than not having to do as many hires. What have you seen, or just what thoughts, insights do you have from your career so far into, well, let me rephrase this. Let me say it like this. If you could wave a magic wand and change anything around the way that that's kind of being done right now, what would you change? Because I feel like that piece is tricky to communicate. And so, figuring out how to adjust that internally, I think can be a challenge. So, and I know that's kind of getting into the culture side of things, but I think retention is very much something that directly impacts talent acquisition, recruitment, marketing, all of those things. So, any thoughts about, if you could just pick something to change, what would you adjust?
this is a very controversial notion, but if I can wave a magic wand, I would say that recruiting teams, recruiting leaders, recruiters, sourcers, they get paid on the average tenure of their hires. So they have a vested interest in the quality of the candidate. I hear this a lot where a recruiter will say, I had to fill that role. I knew it was never going to work, but it got the hiring manager off my back. And 90 days later,
that rack is back open.
They're back doing it again. And I think the challenge with recruiting is, and I hear this all the time, I've thought this, I probably thought today, was they started, I'm out. I'm moving on to the next thing. It's like recruiting is like, you're a hammer and everything's a nail. That's kind of how the industry has been. What I would like to see this go, and where my mind is going, is I want recruiting to be laser focused on talent management, internal mobility, succession planning, all those things we can do to make our lives easier, because the expense of turning and churning employees over and over again, it's millions, billions of dollars in large organizations, but recruiting never has to deal with the consequences of that. It's kind of sunk cost. It's like, you shrug your shoulders and you move on. At my last employer, we had a pretty lofty target for hiring veterinarians, and we hit that target. We're super proud. The problem is we lost more than we hired, so we were net negative for the year. And so I think being upfront about those challenges and doing more to reduce the people going out the back door while you're maintaining people coming in the front, or even maybe a modest increase, I think that's really where that balance needs to be.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights, Aaron. It was great chatting with you. And you're tagged in the event. If anyone has questions they want to ask you, or if they want to check out your podcast, we'll share some links in the comments, and folks can drop questions there. But really appreciate your time. Always a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Likewise, Emily. Thank you.